Please remain standing for the reading of the gospel. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were, because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all." He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." It's the words of God for the people of God. Praise be to God.
Thank you. Okay, so on this day, in the light of... Thank you, please be seated. So on this day, in light of this text where Jesus shares his passion prediction for the second time and is still misunderstood by his beloved disciples, I'm reminded of an episode in Grey's Anatomy years ago which left a lasting impression on me. In that episode, a man is involved in a car accident and he must decide whether he wants to remain on a life-saving machinery or if he wants to be removed and have all of those support systems removed and face the inevitable. So his doctor, Christina Yang, is required to ask him a series of questions as he considers his decision. And I find these questions especially powerful. She asks, "Do you know who you are? Do you know what's happened to you? Do you want to live this way?" I think these questions are helpful as we consider today's passage from Mark's Gospel and the weight of this life of discipleship. You see, here we meet the disciples and Jesus after he has been transfigured on the mountain and then returned to heal a boy possessed by a demon. And surely the disciples are catching on that this is no ordinary teacher. Surely they are witnessing these events and making these connections like we would. I mean, wouldn't we? Would we not be smart enough with all of our technological gadgets and the advances in technology to do a background check on Jesus before following him to ensure that he is credible? Would we not be wise enough to figure out his game plan and mind map it onto an app on our devices to share with others who are not as advanced and as wise as we are? Bless our hearts as we strive to be on the top of the Jesus-following game, right? If disciples received badges like the Scouts, then we would be on our way to our discipleship, our fellowship, and our servant leadership badges. It's too bad that we'd be working in the wrong direction. I mean, if we work solely to earn those badges, right? We're not scouts working to earn a badge that signals how great we are. We're not top-performing students seeking the best grade in the class. We are followers of the one who led by example and stayed focused on the perimeters of his purpose. And unlike the character on the television show, Jesus has not been in a life-altering accident, but he has intentionally chosen a life-altering experience by choosing to become the Word made flesh. He has altered his very composition to be Emmanuel. Do you remember what that means from our Christmas? Yes, God be with us. God with us. fully human and fully divine. And from the moment that he chose to become fully human and fully divine, he modeled for us what it looks like to live contrary to one's privilege and position. The radical decision to be like us and to be with us distinguishes him from those in power who are more interested in distancing themselves and being as unlike the masses as possible. In the first chapter of Mark, it's recorded that he hears a voice from heaven saying during his baptism, and right after it, you remember this? "You are my son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." Not only does he know who he is, but anyone who heard these words knows who he is. And Jesus would be able to answer Dr. Yang's question easily. He knows who he is and tries to share that with his disciples. He knows what has happened to him. And yes, he is committed to and wants to live this way. It seems that the difficult part of his certainty is getting the disciples to share that certainty about him and about themselves as well. And what matters and what happens, what happens when we choose these questions as we reflect on our own journey. Perhaps we'll come away with a better understanding of what is asked and expected of us as modern day disciples. So the first question is deceptively easy. Do you know who you are? Well, of course we know who we are, don't we? I mean, we know our names, we know our birth dates, even if sometimes in a year we might forget how old we were, and then you got to redo it again next year, right? I did that. I was like 33 for 2 years. You know, we know how to show up for our jobs and how to function in social settings. The question that looms overhead is, do you know who you are as a follower of Jesus? Do you know that this identity involves being a disruptor? Do you know that this identity means that you are not at liberty to go with the flow, but you are in the company of others who have also been identified as such, who were also called to challenge the status quo? Do you know that this identity means rejecting much of what is popular, much of what is lucrative, and much of what appears to meet the standards of success? When we say that we are followers of Jesus the Christ, we also proclaim that we do not subject ourselves to the world's rules of engagement. There are choices that we must make every day, and those choices are the ones that serve as markers of our identity. Do we find ways to feed the hungry, or do we prefer to secure our own seat at the table? Do we find ourselves walking with the marginalized in society, or do we prefer to center ourselves on ourselves at all costs? Do we, like the disciples, argue about who is the greatest while working to earn our top follower badge? Or do we spend our time speaking words of encouragement to the downtrodden? Since actions speak louder than words, it seems reasonable to suggest that our discipleship is not marked by a badge or a name tag or a label, a lapel pin. Rather, it's marked by our ability to live in ways that closely resemble the life of the one who taught us by example. Jesus never flashed credentials to confirm his identity. He opted to live into his call and his identity through compassion, companionship, and collaboration. So, what might we do this week that more closely resembles the identity of a follower of the one who came. Luke 14:18. To bring good news to the poor, to release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So what might we do this week that fits into Luke 14:18? Okay, so let us consider the second question. Do you know what's happened to you? The behavior of the disciples gives us some perspective. They were called away from their lives and family, and there's no record of how they proceeded in this major life change. I mean, could it be that their failure to understand who Jesus was calling them to be was a trauma response to leaving everything familiar to them? They did not have the option to ease into the life of discipleship. They were all in with a very patient Jesus leading them. So when we read with a bit of compassion, it does not come as a big surprise that they had so much trouble figuring it out. Perhaps for some who has not had an experience that allows them to trust God, this might feel like a setup. How can we agree to follow if we don't have a clear understanding of the terms? How can anyone be expected to engage in this lifestyle when the leader speaks of being handed over to be killed? Indeed, something must have happened to us to allow us to follow this strange teacher. But what? That's the question. Do you know what has happened to you? Do you know what happens to us when we decide to follow this leader? It's possible that we find ourselves gifted with eyes that could see something more expansive than what is before us. We find ourselves not alone in the work of repairing the world, but in good company as we do our part. It's possible that our eyes are open to new possibilities that were once obscured by the limitations placed on us by the status quo. It's possible that we will no longer see a need for tools of oppression and separation, because this expansive view will show us the benefit of seeing the value of every person and not just those who look like, live like, vote like, or love like us. And believe me when I say this may cause onlookers to ask, what has happened to you? We may need to have a more detailed answer than just to say, Jesus happened to me. Perhaps we will say that we have seen justice in action and we want to participate. Perhaps we will say that we have seen love in action and we want to participate. Perhaps we will say that we've seen evidence of the beauty of the beloved community and we long to participate actively instead of passively. The answers are as varied as our circumstances, but we are all invited to thoughtfully and prayerfully consider our answers and what it looks like to live in it. The last of Dr. Yang's 3 questions is, do you want to live this way? In the text, the disciples are arguing about who's the greatest, and Jesus, he doesn't address this question as they expected, but he does provide information for them to consider. We don't know whose house they've entered, but there's a child in that house. And we don't know whose child suddenly appears and is brought to the center. But Jesus is consistent in his ability to bring those who have been rendered invisible to the center of our field of vision. So Jesus, he takes this child, quite possibly one of the most vulnerable children in the house, the vulnerable human beings in the house at that time. And he takes this child into his arms. Can you picture Jesus hoisting up a kid and doing the hip thing, rocking him back and forth, right? And he's creating a safe space for this child in this gathering of very important adults. And Jesus tells his followers that whoever wants to be first must be servant of all. Can you imagine the tension that must have built in that room as he uttered those words? Can you imagine now how the disciples heard the lesson that was being taught in that moment, but how those who were servants, the unnamed, the invisible, the marginalized, even in the text, must have felt? While the disciples may have thought that they were special because they had been chosen and called and invited to follow this teacher, Jesus makes it very plain that it's not their proximity to him that counts. It's their willingness to be in proximity of others. Now, I want to be careful here to avoid the classic designation of the least of these. Because I think that in light of last week's message of pride and humiliation, it's still, when we use that term, the least of these, we have to be careful because I think it still feeds off our need to be greater than someone else. Jesus says, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. This is what it means to live this way. It's a way of living that makes room for everyone and special consideration to those who have been overlooked and oppressed and forgotten and thrown away or simply ignored. Both Dr. Yang and Jesus remind us that this is completely our choice. Do you want to live this way? Do we want to live a life where we are constantly rearranging notions of who is deserving of our care? Do we want to live our lives knowing that we will be swimming upstream in an effort to welcome those who fit the criteria of one such child? Are we willing to sacrifice our own position and privilege to become servants of all? On the television show, Dr. Yang imagined the possibilities that came with different answers to the questions. And we are afforded the same opportunity. God presents with us an opportunity to consider these questions for ourselves and to imagine the possible outcomes. So our application for the week is to sit with our teacher who asks us to do a self-assessment. And on this day, we are reminded of the privilege of being God's beloved community, and we are asked to do a brief check-in. So as you're sitting with God, ask yourself these 3 questions. And if you're really bold, when you're meeting with your peeps, online, at the restaurant, wherever, have that conversation with them. What are the questions? Beloved, do you know who you are? Do you know what has happened to you? And the last one, do you want to live this way? Let us consider what it means and what it costs to say yes. Then let us live for the chance to reflect, recalibrate, and remember who we are. And we say thanks be to God. Amen.